as well. These were doctors, these were businessmen, and yet I still had that feeling.
Thank you. Thanks, Denny. You have a brain. That's what it means. Yeah. Anybody else?
Father Ray, I see his hand.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I was at a conference and I went over to the local Starbucks to get something, and it was kind of in the heyday of the sexual abuse crisis for the church, and I was waiting for my order to be filled, and I glanced around, and this woman was staring at me, and then confronted me. And I think it's a fairly common experience for a lot of priests to feel particularly vulnerable around children, because people make the assumption that because there are priests that have victimized children, that that's what priests do. So very painful experience.
Yeah. Thanks, Father. All right, Jody, go ahead. Okay. I don't see any other hands.
Jack had his hand up at some point.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jack. Go ahead. You have to unmute.
We could just go on. That's fine.
We'd love to hear what you have to say, Jack.
All right, Miss Peggy. So I, being a nurse for many years, it was not uncommon for me to be in a office with a female physician and the patient deferring to me as if I was the physician. And many times I had to point out to the patient that you're actually talking to the nurse. The doctor is the woman standing here. And so that was not uncommon at all that I'd run into that.
Very
Thanks, Jack.
common. Thank you. Right. So most implicit bias is based on what you see. It has nothing to do with character. Of course, it's just appearance. And I think that's true about some of the examples we just heard. Here's an example of bias that creates more bias. So look at these two newspaper articles describing the same, whoops, sorry, I'm in the wrong spot. Hold on one moment, I got myself all mixed up. Oh, here I am. Okay, sorry.
No problem.
Needless to say, we'd like to know you're human. Thank you, I appreciate it. Let me just see which one I'm on. Oh, that's what I did. I was supposed to show you all of these before we broke. So, but okay. So here are some of the ones, maybe some that we've actually spoken about.
Mhm.
Definitely visual. So now here's an example of bias that creates more bias. Look at these two articles that are describing the same thing. So it's pretty obvious what is planted in people's head as they read looting when they see the black face and finding when they see the white faces. So now I'm going to show you two studies that show that implicit bias is not some cold calculated thing. We're biased implicitly, even if it makes no sense at all. So these are images posted on eBay to sell iPods. People were willing to pay more when they were in white hands. I don't even know what to say about that one. This next slide has some interesting information. Hurricanes with female names kill more people. And that's true. Since 1970s, the National Weather Service names hurricanes in alternating male, female names, and they go through the alphabet, A, B, C, D, etc. And that list is drawn up beforehand. And as you can see from this graph, the light blue are the low damage storms, and they're kind of consistent. But the higher damage storms in the darker color, you can see that there are more deaths associated when the hurricane has a feminine name. So maybe you can think a moment if you can think of any reason why that might happen, because it is true. Female named hurricanes do kill more people. So the reason seems to be when the hurricane is named female, people don't evacuate. The more masculine the name, the more people get out. And in light of what we know of associations of strength and power, it makes perfect implicit bias sense. Think of watching pro football. The viewing public is bombarded with big men pounding each other week after week. So if the hurricane is named Brutus, we think it will be bad. But how could Katrina do much damage? That's implicit bias. And by the way, they removed Katrina from this data because it was such an outlier that it would have really skewed the data even more. So there was also a famous study on the Schofield experiment, and they showed two different videos of a Black child playing with a white child. And they started out playing, then they got a little more rowdy, and then one shoves the other, and it looks a little less like play. In one of the videos, the white boy did the shoving, and in the other video, the Black boy shoved. People in this study were shown only one of two videos. Then they were asked, are they still playing, or is the one boy starting a fight? When the Black boy was doing the shoving, people tended to answer, they're starting to fight. But when the white boy shoved, people said, they're playing. Not only were people biased, but if you ask people, why do you think he was being aggressive? They said, well, I just watched the video and I saw it with my own eyes. So they don't realize that they've been taken for a ride by their stereotypes. Now, I'd just like to show you a few examples of the effects of implicit bias in the real world. I imagine most of you have seen or heard of the Kenneth and Mamie Clark doll test from the 40s. In repeated tests, both Black and white children ascribed positive characteristics to the white dolls, but negative characteristics to the Black ones. And the Clarks concluded that Black children, as a result of living in a racist society, had come to see themselves in a negative light. This experiment was duplicated as recently as 2016 and found the same results. So another researcher recently placed 4 racially diverse dolls, a white, a Latina, Black with lighter skin, and Black with medium skin, in a diverse preschool classroom, and observed Black preschool girls as they played for 1 semester. The girls rarely chose the Black dolls during play. On the rare occasion that the girls chose the Black dolls, they mistreated them often. So what it means, well, back in the 1950s, NAACP used the original Clark test research as evidence for the need to desegregate schools. Yet in this recent doll study, more than a half a century later, in an integrated setting, she found the same anti-Black bias was still there. This researcher, by the way, was a culturally aware Black mom and saw the same tendencies in her own daughter. She concluded that countless other Black children throughout America were probably experiencing some sort of internalized self-hatred as well. Certainly these tendencies can be reversed, but the fact that children develop these associations at such an early age is really compelling. Dr. Brian Marks did research all across the US and asked the question of audiences, what words come to mind when you hear young Black male? As people answered, their responses went into a word cloud. The larger the word, the more frequently it was spoken. Consider that and think of this impact. They all come from our society that holds those biases that we just looked at. It's not a matter of if they're biased. They live in this world and they have a brain. I mean, think again to watching pro football. You're simultaneously being exposed to Black male bodies and white male mentalities at the same time. 300-pound bodies are hitting and hurting each other. Some people watch all three games, right? Sunday, Monday, and Thursday. Then they cut to the sidelines and we usually see white coaches thinking and calling plays and a white male owner of a team. Non-Black people see young Black men as bigger, taller, more muscular, and more threatening than young white men. It's not some big conspiracy. The basis of implicit bias lies in the experiences of everyday life. As you are entertained by football, your bias is formed. Now, I know your group has spoken a lot about the discriminatory effects of bias in the world of finance. Black people have been disadvantaged. And if loan officers even now are asked if they're biased, they'll say no and not recognize it. And whites don't even know they're being privileged when they get a lower rate. We've seen blatant disparate effects in healthcare. Here are some recent Massachusetts COVID-19 cases. Notice in the right column, the percent of population, and in the left, the cases of COVID. You've talked about inequity in every level of the criminal justice system. Even individuals with the most prominent Afrocentric features, dark skin, wide nose, full lips, received longer sentences than those with lighter skin and less prominent African-American features. In education, previous performance being equal, K through 12 teachers have lower expectations for students of color, and the suspensions rate are extremely disproportionate. Notice this data. These are preschool students. Preschool, and in the first column you'll see enrollment. So turquoise is the white enrollment and yellow is the Black. But the second and third columns are out of school suspensions, single and multiple. And the layers of bias for which children are affected will be cumulative. You may remember the Diallo case, one of the early cases of police profiling in 1999. He was standing outside his apartment in the Bronx, and 4 police in plain clothes were looking for a suspect in a rape case, Black or Hispanic. They yelled "stop" to him, and he reached into his pocket for his wallet, and all 4 shot him. We don't know what was in their minds, but certainly remember, unconscious bias influences the way we interpret behavior when he put his hand in his pocket. The question the jurors were asked, would a reasonable police officer in that circumstance come to the same kind of decision? Clearly, the police officers were wrong, but was it a reasonable assumption? So a test was designed in the lab. Each person saw either a Black or white face quickly, then a gun or a hand tool, and then a blank square. And they were asked to press one button if they saw a gun and a different one if they saw a hand tool. Now, in one version, they had all the time they wanted, and in another, they only had a half a second to mimic the time pressure a police officer might be under. This test has been replicated many times. Everyone got them all right if it was done slowly, because they could clearly see the difference between the two. But under time pressure, the mistakes were not random. They were biased by race. They mistakenly saw a gun more often if the face preceding the hand tool or gun was black than if it was white. And it did not matter if blacks or whites were tested. They all had the same bias, because they all live in this culture where violence is associated more with Black males than white males. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment, and we're going to maybe see if people have some ideas about how we can learn to align our values with our responses. And then after we talk a little bit, I'll share some of the suggestions from people that are active in this field. So let me stop sharing here a moment. So can
Anybody
we
have any
interrupt our
thoughts?
guys?
Just remember to unmute if you would like to speak. I know you're probably overwhelmed like I am. And this is my 4th time I've seen it.
I still feel the same way too. It's powerful presentation.
The only thing that I can say is sometimes I will catch myself. I'm not thinking so much. I'm sure it's there, but I'm not so much thinking about racial bias as sometimes religious bias. And all of a sudden I'll catch myself, and thank God, because then I think there's an option for me to question it and say, wait, you're perceiving this wrong, or you may be perceiving this wrong. And I'm happy that that happens frequently. So it's like a point at which you can start to question and change some of your assumptions. In addition, I remember years and years and years ago when I tended to distrust more. And so I learned that I could have several interpretations of a situation, and why not choose the positive one? Because if it's a negative interpretation, it's going to come back and hit me in the face again. And that was a wonderful blessing, because I learned that if 2 thoughts came into my mind, let's go with the positive one if we can. And that was really helpful.
That's excellent.
Great. Thanks, Charlotte. And I think Serafina had her hand.
Yeah, I mean, I'm overwhelmed by this, because I think biases go so deep and so far into so many things. I mean, to be honest with you right now, focusing on what's happening in Israel and Palestine, I have biases, about Jewish people. I'm being perfectly honest about it. I have, and it's very interesting because your example, Jody, of your experience, going on the plane to Chicago, I did not automatically think any of those people were white. So I thought, oh, okay, good. But I do think, as a single older woman, when I go outside at night in my neighborhood and I see, young Black men walking, and this is a street that has a lot of traffic, I'm confessing to you, I do, just tense up for a minute. I do. And so I think the real issue for me is we have the biases,
Mhm.
and it's not just about race. It's about a lot of things, right? I have real big biases, another confession. You know, white, uneducated, sorry, men and women who tend to be, who I think are, you know, tend to be very racist or whatever. I'm confessing. So I have real biases there. I think that, and some of the biases are real in terms of our experiences. The question is, what do we do with those? You know, how do we deal with them so that they're not negative or harmful or discriminatory, and we check them, that we check them in the moment. Maybe that's what Charlotte was saying, actually. You know, we check them in the moment. And I do, you know, and you know, I've had some bad experiences in my neighborhood, but mostly I've had really good experiences with young Black men and women who are crossing my property every single day. But there's still that fear. But I'm saying it's not just about race. We have it about everything, or at least I do, right? And
we do.
I just want to know, what do we do to check it and not make it negative and harmful and systemic?
It's a lifetime work.
Yeah.
Sure.
And recognizing it to begin with. So that's a plus. The first thing, the hardest thing sometimes is to recognize it in ourselves. So
Yeah.
that's great. Is there anybody else who'd like to share?
Yeah, I'd like to share. I was a teacher in Montgomery County at a school where the population was 85 to 90% Black. And we were constantly talking about having high expectations, doing whatever we could to be aware of the tendency to have low expectations for these kids, and to be conscious all the time that if you're debating whether or not the kids should do activity A or activity B, we should err on the side of giving them the harder work.
Challenge.
Because they can probably do it. And the interesting thing I found about some of the discussion tonight was the fact that everyone in society has these biases. The Black teachers were just as likely as the white teachers to have low expectations for the students, and had to fight equally hard to overcome those biases and to try to challenge those kids to the level that they could do their work. One example was I wanted to do a science fair at the school, and there was at least one person who was absolutely dead set against it. She said, they can't do it. You don't know these kids like I know these kids. And I will tell you, she genuinely had been working at that school since it opened. She genuinely loved those kids. But she was frankly, she was simply wrong. They could do it. They did do it. And I'll give her credit. She was the first one to come up and congratulate me and say that they really did it. And you know, it's just something you have to fight constantly.
Yeah.
And another example is just walking around the city. If I'm walking around downtown or on the subway platform, this has happened at least once on the subway platform and at least once or twice walking around, a young Black man would come up to me, and the first things he would say is, "Don't be afraid of me." And I would say, "I'm not afraid of you. What do you need?" And and go from there. But it's just everywhere.
Yeah.
John, I'd like to say something to what you just said. I agree with you as a teacher. My experience was color had nothing to do with some of the implicit bias against students. What surprised me was often it was the outsider who came in, the hippie teacher, the young person who hadn't had as much teacher training and become part of the teacher culture, who often broke the mold.
You want to say?
And had better, higher expectations for what kids could do.
Let me just check page 2, make sure nobody has their hand raised. Is that a hand raised, Mary?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I'm sorry I got in here late, so I don't know if you've already talked about healthcare bias.
Now, please share, Mary. You're fine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
There was a bill presented, which I'm almost certain passed, requiring that healthcare institutions, and I'm not sure exactly which ones, had to study their outcomes. And a good example was for obese people, because the outcomes were so bad, because the doctors just didn't believe them. And it happens, I know, with women, and especially with Black women, that doctors just don't believe what they're saying. So therefore, they don't get the treatment that they require. So by requiring them, first they have to have training. Training, I think, is required on a regular basis for doctors, nurses, and I'm not sure to who, and I'll find out more about that. I'm sorry, I don't have the details. They have to be trained, and then they have to start collecting data so that over time it should show that the outcomes are becoming more similar and not so bad.
Good.
That's all.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Jerry, are you raising your hand, Jerry?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can hear you.
I was just thinking that sometimes I appreciate what Jody said, and although I know about that, I didn't know about it. She opened up all kinds of windows for me tonight and for myself. But I was thinking about this, that sometimes we do this implicit bias because basically we're making assumptions, and we do that all the time without having the evidence. And I remember as a brand new teacher in Anne Arundel County, I had a really diverse class. I had, Caucasian kids that came from Appalachia, and they were in 8th grade and they couldn't read. And I had little Black kids that came from Pumphrey, but I had this child in my class. I'll never forget it. And, it was my first time teaching ever. And I had this little kid named Leroy, and he came to church, to school polished every day with a white starched shirt and a tie and his hair combed. He was just like adorable. And I was teaching social studies, and every Friday was current event day. So they had to bring in a current event. His work was immaculate. His penmanship was so good. He never missed an assignment, except every Friday, he never brought in a current news event. So he had nothing to contribute. So one day, after about the 3rd week in a row, I said, Leroy, you're so conscientious about your work, and it's all so neat. It's just like you present such a neat, a vision to me all the time, but you never do your homework for current events. And he said, Mrs. Flakowski, I'm the only person in my family that can read. We don't get any magazines, and we don't get any books because nobody in my house can read but me. I can still feel myself welling up when I just assumed all the kids could get a newspaper. And at the time, the secondary school in which I was teaching really didn't have much of a library, or I don't even know why, but the next week, on Monday, I had a table and there was all kinds of current events and newspapers on that table. And I said to the kids, help yourselves. But I never forgot that I just assumed, and I especially assumed about Leroy because he looked so put together. And so I had this implicit bias. It didn't even occur to me that no one in this child's family read, and they had no readable materials. I grew up reading the boxes stack of cereal boxes, and I was just a very normal income family. And I think our implicit biases come from assumptions a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Very excellent.
That's,
Anybody else?
Louise, is that your hand?
I have something,
Hey,
and
Tom.
it's really kind of brief, but I know I have a bias that whenever I am out somewhere and I look at how people are dressed with their, the style of letting your pants hang down so that you can see the underwear. It's kind of like, it just completely just how it just baffles my mind that someone can present themselves respectively in such a way. And it's not necessarily, I don't think it's a black thing, I don't think it's a white thing, it's just a cultural thing as to presenting yourself and having respect for yourself while you're in public. And I know that immediately I think that they don't have much respect for themselves. Whereas, and that's just a brief comment.
Thanks, Tom. All right, Jody, why don't we hand it back to you?
I'll try to do it right this time. All right, so how do we learn to align our values with our responses? So recognizing that bias can be unconscious like this, it does reduce the shame and defensiveness, which is always counterproductive. So that's good, and we're recognizing it. But how do we interrupt it and reduce it? And the couple examples I heard were good, and you're going to see them here, I think. So first of all, what doesn't work? Well, good intentions alone are not enough. And diverse decision-making bodies are good, but they won't eliminate implicit bias. It's all around us. We definitely want diverse perspectives, but certainly Black people can have biases against other Black people. They can. Some women can have biases against other women, etc. Again, it's associations that are in our society for sure. We are all vulnerable to our biases and the culture that we live in. So what can we do? Well, a good first step is what we're doing, recognizing that we have implicit bias. Remember, life experiences influence every decision. So we want to look for data that disprove these stereotypes that we might have in our head. We want to increase our exposure to the other and add positive associations with members of the diverse group, with getting to know more people, joining organizations, even literature, TV, movies, posters, etc. So when we hear young Black men, we can picture something like this at Morehouse College graduation, for example. If you're a judge or a probation officer, for example, this is an extreme, and the only time you interact with African Americans is when they're sitting at the defendant's table, of course your view will be skewed because all of your associations with Black men are negative. Or if all you do is see Black men playing football. All of us can hang posters of Black priests, social workers, doctors, mathematicians, etc., in our workplaces, our church lobbies, our homes. Reset your automatic associations. So stare at awesome Black people to dissociate the associations that happen automatically in our brains. You won't have to look far to find an unlimited number. Of course, you'll recognize these people. I think Colin Powell and Maya Angelou receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom from former President Barack Obama. Arthur Ashe, who founded the Arthur Ashe Foundation for the Defeat of AIDS. Ruby Bridges, civil rights activist from 1954 until present, who was the first to integrate an all-white elementary school in Louisiana at 6 years old, and she never missed a day of school. Wish I could say that. And Kamala Harris. Another thing we can all do, gifts provide great opportunities. Give books celebrating children and adults of other cultures to your grandchildren to expose them. That May Among the Stars, it's a beautiful picture book. It's the first African-American woman to travel in space, Mae Jemison. And I know historically women and Blacks have, not had their name associated even often to things that they did because they could only write men's name or white name, and they actually changed them. So anyway, seeing exposure, having exposure like this, Skip brought up, bring a child or a friend to the Reginald Lewis African American, the Children's Book Festival in Baltimore. And for our work here, the Ecosystem of Bias by Dr. Bryant Marks is coming out this summer. That would be a great one. Some say, a lot of people say, I have a good friend who is Black, so I'm not biased. But we need to interact with many people of the out group that we're not of. So we see the same diversity that we see in our own in group. White is the standard, and we need to normalize other standards. For homework, let's take some downtime and expose ourselves to difference. Do something that will help us grow. Growth will happen at the edge of our comfort zones, not while we're in it. Hiring practices are crucial. So maybe you're on a board, or you're hiring people, or this is a conversation you can have with your children and grandchildren. But decide priorities before interviewing. Read resumes without names or pictures. If you have extremely good candidates or bad candidates, there's no problem. But it's that gray area where most people fall that bias will come into play the most. Hold blind auditions. When a symphony orchestra put up a screen so they couldn't see the person auditioning, there was a 50% increase in hiring women. And I would imagine that all of those people that were making the decisions said previously that they were basing their decisions strictly on talent. But that's the implicit part of it. Science Journal Behavioral Psychology did blind reviews of submissions where they couldn't see the author's name, and there was a 33% increase in publications by female authors in biology. So build diversity, include statements encouraging the other. And in all fields, we need to standardize some treatments. So teachers could grade papers before looking at the names. Police officers, for example, can say the same thing to every person they stop for a particular offense, regardless of their gender or their race or their appearance or their car. Like, you'd have a script, and that could be true going into any kind of interaction, activities, difficult conversations. I know when I used to go into parent-teacher conferences with, if I had a difficult student, I would try to picture like the best students that I have and just kind of put that in my mindset. And then, of course, I always said Mother Teresa's prayer, give me the heart of Jesus. That's not a bad one to keep in your back pocket all the time. Also, focused attention. When making important decisions involving other people, give them focused attention. In studies, people were more biased when they were rushed or distracted because implicit bias doesn't take conscious thought. When we're rushed or distracted, we tend to fall back on spontaneous reactions. Remember, our brains take shortcuts. Change the unexpected to the expected. So visualize what you think you will see as you walk into a meeting, and whatever vision you're seeing, change it, which someone just gave that example. Pause when you feel a reaction to someone and ask yourself, is this how I would react if this person looked like me? How do you react to a squeegee boy? Move toward young Black men instead of away. Be intentional, get to know them. There are enormous consequences when we can change the expected to the unexpected. Just think, we have 2 whole generations of people whose first visual image of a US president is a Black man or a Black female vice president. So I'm going to wrap things up now so we can have a little more discussion time. There are 2 more very important segments that I think would be great for us to discuss, and Peg and Skip have allotted time to continue our bias work next month. We'll take a look at some specific biases for which I think you will have many examples to share. And secondly, we're going to look at the strong bias of artificial intelligence, which is a hidden component of all of our lives. So for homework this month, we think it would be valuable if everyone could take the implicit association test, if you haven't taken it already. You can just Google IAT and it'll pop right up. And we're suggesting, if you haven't done this, that you take the race test. It only takes about 10 minutes, and feel free to email one of us if you have any questions about it. And I really want to thank you for your patience tonight, because I know there's been a lot of me talking, which is not ideal, especially as a teacher. I'm a little self-conscious about that, but there was a lot, I think, to present. But thank you. And I do want to leave you with one additional thought. In the 13th century, St. Thomas Aquinas, theologian, said, "Quid recipitor ad modum recipientis recipitor." Whatever is received in the manner of the receiver. I think he understood bias. So I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully, there.
Rhodey, I think I speak for everybody here tonight when I say that we really, really appreciate what you've
Thank you.
shared with us. The
Thanks.
depth of it, the comprehension of it, the amount of work. And please, let's all do applaud.
Oh, no, are you kidding? I'm so grateful to be part of your group, because you have inspired me, and I know all of us. So thank you all.
We're so blessed that you are a part of our group. And as she said, sisters and brothers, there is so much that she's done that we could not contain it in one session. I can tell you, from being one of the 2 sets of ears, Peggy being the other, when she started into artificial intelligence, which will be a part of the next presentation, I had no idea. I had never even thought about what she was bringing up and about the impact artificial intelligence has on racism, because we're all little logarithmic humans making algorithmic humans making the algorithms. So what do you expect? Thank you so much again. And Peggy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Skip, and thank you, Jody, very much. I do have one question. There's Sue Baltimore. Is that Sue Revnick?
Yeah, that's Sue Rovnak. Sorry.
That's all right. I just want to make sure. And there's one person phone number, 410-240-6807. That's all right. I'll call you later. So are there any comments that anyone would like to make before we do our final prayer?
This is Sharon.
Yes, Sharon.
The thing about the artificial intelligence, there's been a documentary on PBS that's been circulating for a while that shows that the artificial intelligence, which is all around us, is biased because of, it's biased because, first of all, almost all of the algorithm initially, and too much today, are created by men. And they also have been created by white men. So it acts based upon the creature, the people that created it. And as you said, everyone has bias, and it's unconscious. So when they're sitting coding, which is how you develop an algorithm anyway, and anything, they're coding from their own implicit biases.
Exactly.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Oh, Jody, I forgot to remind everybody that our next meeting is going to be June the 16th at 7. So put that in your mind
16th,
and on your.
okay.
Serafina, did you want to say something?
I did. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So I loved it. I loved every single thing, and I loved all of the wonderful examples that you gave, Jody, of how we can uplift African Americans or in our people of color who've been achievers. But what I loved really was what you said about when you see a young African American, instead of backing away, go towards that person and engage. Because I fear that all of the wonderful accomplishments that we can show, you know, as examples of African Americans doing wonderful things, I'm afraid goes into that category of, oh, I have a friend. You know, it's kind of like the exception to the rule. And what I think we need to do is figure out a way to uplift, not the exception, but the average person out there living, you know, our lives like the rest of us. And I'm not sure how to do it, but I think that's really where we need to go.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jerry.
And don't underestimate the value of a smile.
And
Best
I
thing-
was talking with Joe McNeely last week, and I think one thing we need to seriously think about, because our church is skewed racially, you know, towards one group more than all kinds of diversity all over the place, that we need to develop fellowship with some other parish, or even maybe not a Catholic church even, where we really do begin to fellowship on a fairly regular, you know, if scheduled basis, to begin to really learn who the other are.
Right. Thank you, Skip. And one of the best things one of my bosses told me once was always assume good intentions.
Yeah.
So Jerry, I'm not very far from you, I don't think. I would absolutely some evening love to come over and walk in your neighborhood with you. I think there's safety in numbers, so to speak.
Oh, my neighbor, don't let me steer you wrong. My neighborhood is, I'm not afraid in my neighborhood. But I would love you to come and do that.
Okay.
That was
Okay,
superb.
and yes, I shouldn't have put that negative spin on it, but I
Yeah,
would
no.
love, or you can come here. I live in a
Yeah.
very diverse neighborhood also,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
actually proactively go out and look for opportunities.
Would love to do that, Sue.
Yeah.
Would love to do it.
That's
Yeah,
great.
thank you.
Excellent. All right, so thank you all for joining us tonight. So if we'll just bow our heads for a moment for our final prayer. Dear God of love, help us. We think we are following your path, but learn tonight that it may be just our own paths with different directions. Help us remember to pause, to recognize our life filters, and see more clearly your direction. Help us to trust your lead and follow. When we must lead, help us lead in love. Amen.
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 Thank you all so much. And John, we forgot to ask you how you're feeling.
Me?
Yes,
Yeah.
John. Yes.
Oh, I'm fine. I'm doing okay.
Doing better?
Great.
All right.
Well,
good.
I'm sitting here in a cast.
Yeah, we figured. You're in your cast position.
Right.
And the new grandbabies, so Marianne and Al and Tom and Eileen, everybody's having fun. Excellent, excellent. All right, well, anybody's welcome to stay on, but don't feel like you have to. And we'll see you Sunday next month Friday, whenever. All right.
Okay.
Thanks again. And another thank you to Jody. My
Oh,
dear,
My pleasure.
awesome, Jody.
Thanks, Jody.
dear sister.
Could you put those tests
Thanks, Jody.
out somewhere in an email or something, the two tests you mentioned?
Sure. Even if you, Peggy, I'll put it in the email, but if you Google IAT, it'll pop right
Okay.
up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let
Thank
me
you.
know if you can't find it, Charlotte.
Okay. Jody, it was great.
Thanks. Thank you all.
Jody, did you see? Oh,
Oh.
Whose is that?
That's
Matthias.
I'm sure that's Al and Marianne's.
Oh,
Yes, it's their grandchildren, child,
very cute.
Megan and Matthias.
Okay,
Awesome.
cool.
That's nothing
So-
like,
Thank you.
Yeah,
So,
so I'll get out of here. You can guys talk a little bit, but
all right,
Yeah.
see you. So Susan, Jody, did you see Susan's on?
Oh, no, where? Bye, Kathleen. Where's
Hi,
Susan?
Kathleen, nice to see you again.
I'm right next to you.
Well, it keeps hopping around.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Susan.
Hi.
So nice.
I
to
missed
see you.
I missed the beginning, so I think you always send out the recording, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, the recording, somebody else, I wasn't on as host, so I had to go back out and come back in a couple times, and then I finally got it recorded. So we missed the very beginning, but not much. So we missed Father's prayer. Sorry, Father.
you, and not much. That was a lot. Father's prayer.
Oh, yeah, I missed it because I was out trying to get the recording working.
Peggy, excuse me, my company's here, so I've got.
Oh,
to
that's
sign
right.
off.
Thanks, Skip.
I love you
Thank
all.
you.
Yeah.
Take care.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye now.
So I have a question and I don't know why I don't know this or, Serafina, is that, is that your
Okay,
given name? I'm so confused. I mean,
okay. So Jerry Bukowski and I are on a number of different committees and
Okay.
conversations together. And one day I just got so, like, what are we going to do to fix this? Because we never know who's referring to who. So I said, just call me Serafina. I don't know where it came from, but it came, and there you have it. So
Okay.
when we're in meetings together, I go by Serafina.
Okay.
Excellent.
Thanks for that
Been that
clarification.
ever since.
I thought, okay, maybe.
Some people really like it. I mean, Father Ray and Ray Heil tend to call me that all the time.
So I will shoot you an email, Jerry, and I would
Yes,
very much like to be proactive. And
that would be
anybody
wonderful.
else who would like to walk in their
Trust me.
neighborhood and would
Yeah,
like. to
and I'm
serve.
not fearful. It's not that I'm fearful, but it is that, that moment. And I just want to share this. So I think or maybe not. I have a sister who was adopted, who's Ethiopian, right? She's married to an African American, and they live 5 minutes from me behind, they live in Morgan Park, behind Morgan State. And I have to tell you that her husband, his name is Selwyn Internesh.
You all know, most of you know.
Yeah, they couldn't be here tonight because they have something at Morgan Park, and he's the vice chair of their neighborhood association. But trust me that he will make sure, both of them, that he is seen around my house, that people know that there's Black blood in my family. In his mind, I find it embarrassing sometimes, but in his mind, it is a way, I think, that he feels to protect me to be accepted, right?
Oh.
So I certainly don't live in a neighborhood that is at all, but I do live on a main street from, I don't know where you are, Sue, but the shopping plaza at Loch Raven in Oregon,
Okay.
which had been really a drug infested, now it's being redone by Morgan. And the Alameda at the other end. So there's a lot, this is a very diverse neighborhood. It is a very socially integrated neighborhood. I mean, we all interact and it is economically very diverse. It's an interesting little microcosm, I think, of the city. And but there have been issues. There have been break-ins. I've had my house broken into at 11 o'clock at night while I was here. So it's always that, how do you balance being smart, right, and safe, versus I don't want to be biased kind of thing. Yeah.
Yep.
It occurred to me that, because I'm not out of the house a whole lot, some, but not as much as I used to be. But one place I engage with a lot of people are at doctor's appointments, dental appointments, and I find that I engage people and talk. And I guess it's coincidence, or just chance, I mean, that many, many times the people I'm engaging are African-American or dark skinned. I can't assume that they're African-American. And also when I see a different name, like with a doctor's assistant or whatever, I like to engage that person, ask where they're from, and ask, interactive things, which I think it helps. I mean, and I also don't want to give the impression by my examples that I'm not constantly having to adjust for biases, because I mean, there's plenty of them, I'm sure. But I don't know. I think that just talking to people is a really good thing too. I check out people. They may want me to shut up. But I find that when I'm in waiting rooms and stuff, and I engage people, some of them seem surprised that I bothered to talk to them, and I have really enjoyed it. So I think that helps.
Yep.
I'm talking of various cultural spheres and skin colors.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of work to do. What can we say? In a lot of different areas.
I wonder how much of it falls across economic lines, where that intersection of race and economic status.
Yeah.
cross.
You mean just with the bias, or with the
Even with the
racial?
bias, I mean, with the bias too. I mean, I think that probably, many white people feel far more comfortable with people of color who they know are in their same economic status.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's true.
Exposure, though, has a lot to help with that, because I think that some of that, I worked with mostly inner city population when I worked at Hopkins. And so I was very used to